Must be Cipher C.
Oh shit, guys, we're in the show! Spy Family is the hottest anime of the season with good reason. Hey, that rhymes. It's almost like a spy sitcom where everyone's either hot, adorable, or goofy, but they all have something to hide and no one's on the same page. The only thing more wholesome than the show itself is the shit ton of fan art that comes out each week, even if it completely misrepresents the show. Yes, everyone, draw Lloyd and Yor as this super sexy, intimate couple, when in actuality they have the romantic chemistry of a peanut. At first, I was seeing the Spanish and French dubs get shared around on social media, so I was already exposed to Anya being cute in a bunch of different languages.
Ay, no puedes.
But let's check out the English dubbed episodes that are out so far.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet the cast!
I have to admit, when I saw the name Alex Organ in the cast list, I did a double take, considering that he hadn't voiced a new role in an anime dub in over 4 years. He was a semi-regular voice actor for Funimation, and many might remember him as the first English voice for Aizawa in My Hero Academia. He seemed to step away from voice acting for a bit to focus on his theater work in Dallas. Funnily enough, the housemaster Lloyd wanted to punch in episode 4 is played in the dub by the guy who replaced Alex in various shows, from My Hero Academia to Fairy Tail to Kekai Sensen. So to see Alex suddenly come back voicing the lead in probably the most popular anime this season was a shock to say the least. I can't say what made him decide to come back to voice acting, but it probably helps that this anime's ADR director, Chris George, who's also directing Heroines Run the Show this season, has worked with Alex as either a director or engineer on some of his most prominent roles. Alex seems to have a knack for playing very serious characters that have crisp diction, which gives off a very strong sense of deliberateness and sophistication. He also played a giraffe samurai in One Piece, but the more serious roles definitely stand out the most in my mind whenever his name comes up, and it's partially because he's contributed to some of my favorite moments in my favorite anime, like Makishima from Psycho Pass. Well, at least season 1.
Physical books are more than the words they contain. They're also tools to stimulate your senses and adjust your thinking. I think it may be a sort of mental tuning. It's the feeling of the paper against my fingers, that familiar smell of pulp and glue, the momentary stimulation to my brain when I turn each page. These sensations regulate and focus my brain. They make it work better.
That was also a situation where Alex played a character that had a different sounding voice in the original version, but it still worked in its own way. You can definitely see the parallels between Lloyd and the other characters Alex Organ has played in the past.
Dick.
The only difference here is the role that this character type plays. Lloyd is a character that is all about self-seriousness. Everything he says and how he presents himself needs to come off as believable to the characters in the show, while it's also painfully obvious to the audience that he's just putting on a mask.
Spies are careful. We can't draw attention to ourselves.
This is one of the few times that such a self-serious and sophisticated way of talking would work in a comedy series, because it's supposed to be a contrast to everything else. However, maybe that very even-sounding performance misses out on some comedically exaggerated punchlines as a result, compared to the Seiyu Takuya Eguchi.
Nani itteru no oi! Oi!
Everyone has strengths and weaknesses.
I will admit, in episode 1, it did feel like Lloyd's more fanciful word choices were downgraded somewhat in the dub. Whether it's have a kid instead of produce a child, or best of luck instead of may you find happiness. But honestly, it hasn't felt like as much of a problem since then. I think dialogue that's slightly on the stiff side can contribute to Lloyd's character, at least when he's in spy mode, while the more casual dialogue that you find in the dub can contribute to the personas he puts on. I don't know the exact methodology each writer used. Sometimes translators take nuances that don't have exact parallels in English and rework them into another part of the line. You could also talk about how Yor uses the san honorific with Anya in Japanese to indicate some emotional distance from her fake daughter. That is obviously still implied in the dub through the nature of the story, although it might not be as clear.
Anya-san, 喜ぶと思います。
The ADR writer for this dub was Tyler Walker, who we've covered on the channel before. We know there's usually some deliberate component to his writing and directing, with Spy Family being no exception so far. Regardless, I never really associated Alex Organ as the guy you would get to play the lead in an over-the-top comedy series, but in this case, it does feel like perfect casting. Lloyd is effectively tricking everybody into thinking that he is the straight man and arguably one of the most normal things in the show that revolves around espionage, telepathic children, and super strong assassins. Your Forger is played in Japanese by Saori Hayami, who is a very experienced and popular seiyuu, who also coincidentally played a love interest to another protagonist played by Lloyd Seiyu in My Teen Romantic Comedy Snafu. So suffice to say, she has a lot of natural chemistry with her fake husband in this show.
心配だ。
見送る時って不安ですよね。わかります。
Natalie Von Sistine has a less extensive anime acting resume, having more of a background in audio engineering for dubs and video game acting. Both actors speak in a very proper, breathy, almost unobtrusive way, which I guess is pretty indicative of those pesky patriarchal societal demands of the setting.
飯作らない嫁とか存在するの？
確かにその年で独り身はないわね。怪しい怪しい。
There's no way. I'll never be a homemaker.
Obviously, Natalie's voice is deeper, but there's still a slight distinction in her voice when you're internally monologues. She definitely sounds more airheaded in the Japanese version, which is one of yours distinct points of charm. While Natalie's more consistent approach has a slightly different effect that has definitely grown on me over the episodes.
Mama's so cool! Are you alright, my sweetie? I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have let you out of my sight. There. Look at me. I'm a failure of a mother.
I also like the layer of aggression Yor takes on when switching into assassin mode.
What I heard is that there's a traitorous scumbag staying here.
Despite the intensity of her facial expressions and physical mannerisms, her aggressiveness isn't loud but no less intimidating, threatening, and step-on-me-esque.
大変恐縮なのですが、息の根、止めさせていただいてもよろしいでしょうか。
No! You can't take the life of an innocent person because of some school!
What's wrong?
Frankie is much more nasally in Japanese, given that he's played by Hiroyuki Yoshino, the king of nasal.
この世界で動物って喋る?
But it still sounds like Anthony Bowling has fun with the role, especially with the Count Scruffy persona.
But it'll take more to beat me.
The most different sounding adult in the dub right now is probably Henry Henderson, who also just kind of looks like the human version of Mr. Harriman from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
My vengeance! Stop!
His Japanese actor is Kazuhiro Yamaji, who's played much grislier characters like Sid Highwind and Hit, not to mention the dub voices of Norman Osborn, Wolverine, and Darth Maul.
Who in their right mind would ever anticipate something like that?
Meanwhile, in the dub, you have Barry Yandell, who is also a fantastic actor and does a great job with whatever you give him.
I know you trusting is very good this idea.
Barry does sound old, but in more of a wheezy way, capturing the pretentious and over-the-top aspect of the character, whereas Yamaji sounds more full-bodied.
Very elegant.
But enough about that. Let's talk about the children.
I'm being sold at traffickers!
I will admit, it was easier for me to tell that Anya wasn't played by a child in the English version compared to the Japanese. I actually had to look up her seiyuu to confirm that she is in fact played by Atsumi Tanizaki, who is kind of well known for playing young or young-looking characters.
人がゴミのようだ。
人がゴミのようだ。
Anya is actually lower in pitch for many lines in the Japanese version, and Tanizaki can still expertly sell her cuteness with a hint of deadpan. This doesn't mean that Megan Shipman does a poor job, far from it. I'm just more familiar with her work from the offset.
I'm feeling a lot of pressure all of a sudden.
Fun fact, Megan and Natalie play mother and daughter in both this show and Attack on Titan's final season.
Okie-dokie.
However, the sound of Anya's voice is only half the battle, as her style of dialogue has several quirks, particularly with how she flubs certain words.
This is my first outing in my brand new outfit.
In fact, in the manga, her speech bubbles don't contain any kanji characters, which makes her seem childish right off the bat. Some of this is easier to achieve in the subs or speech bubbles where you can write out the words incorrectly, so the dub usually sticks to misspoken lines.
Thanks a crunch. Have a nice day.
It can be a little overdone considering that Anya's supposed to be faking it as a well-educated student, and it's kind of weird that the other characters don't point this out, but I would argue that's more of an issue with the show itself than the localization.
It's all because I stepped in that poo-poo.
In episode 4's most emotional moment, Anya refers to her biological mother slightly different to how she refers to Yor, and the dub did pick up on that. So I am definitely looking forward to some of the other ways that Megan and the localization team handle her character.
In Japanese, the uncle says, "Chi wa chikara da," which means knowledge is power, and the kid says Chihuahua Chikara, which is Chihuahua power. And so that it's sort of this wordplay in the Japanese that obviously you have to deal with differently in the English, because knowledge is power doesn't sound like Chihuahua power. Because there's a drawing of this swole Chihuahua, you have to hew really close to the original choke, because like there's this visual component.
When it comes to Anya talking in the third person in the original, though,
Anya, 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 Anya.
I never really know how this kind of thing quote-unquote should be done in English. The manga translation cut that out too, and even the subs only give her a third-person line every once in a while. I guess maybe it would make her sound too much like a mascot character or a puppet like Elmo.
Anya, Elmo knows where you live!
But Anya kind of is the mascot for this show at this point, right?
Some may say it's a good change, others may say it's a bad change.
And then we have the rest of the kids, who, to be honest, are a little bit more difficult to talk about due to the nature of their involvement in the story. Mainly with how they're a lot smarter than Anya. It's worth noting that they aren't played by child actors in either language. That's not necessarily a bad thing. There's just a part of me that wishes child actors could be involved more regularly with dubbing. These kids were raised in a very privileged environment, and part of the reason why they're in this school in the first place is because they're smarter than the average 6-year-old. So judging the performances of these characters is going to necessarily require some suspension of disbelief right off the bat.
心配ありがとう.
Unfortunately, that makes it hard to talk about the direction of the performances critically, but I'll do my best to explain. At the very least, I could say the other kids sound young in both languages, even if they don't sound as young as 6. But then again, should they? Damien Desmond tries to act very prideful and mature, so of course he's not going to sound like Anya. It's a little easy to tell that Damon is played by an older woman in the dub, but that might just be because I can close my eyes and hear a young Haruhi from Oran, which if you think about it is kind of ironic.
You're probably not very rich either. I hate all these damn rich people.
Granted, Caitlin Glass does sound more boyish the angrier and more emotional Damien gets.
Don't get cocky, you dumb, ugly doggo!
She's learning something from the cartoon.
As for his flunkies,
You even made sure the teacher wasn't looking before.
they sound ridiculous, but they also look absolutely ridiculous, so go figure, I guess. My favorite performance of the dubbed kids is actually Danny Chambers as Becky Blackbell. Maybe it's because of the way the character is written, but I think Danny strikes that perfect balance between the naive innocence of a child with the pride of a rich kid. Though that's no surprise, as she is also just an expert on child voices in general.
Why does Roxas look like Ventus?
Henry Henderson, Damien Desmond, Becky Blackbell, Frankie Frankson.
Placido P. Placido.
Alan A. Allen.
Johnson J. Johnson.
Obviously, we've got a ways to go with this anime at the time of this video, but so far I'd say one of the strongest performances in the dub is Dallas Reed as Yuri.
The name Twilight, that ring any bells for you?
He sounds young and lighthearted, matching the character's appearance, but is also able to keep up with his manic flurry of changing emotions. People probably know Dallas best as Asta from Black Clover, i.e. the protagonist of the biggest anime dub Chris George has ever directed. He controls his delivery carefully to make it sound like Yuri's suppressing his true feelings as he tries putting up a front. His nonchalant side is legitimately funny, while his obsessive side is legitimately creepy.
And I mean anything. No, I'm totally relaxed. It'll take a lot more than food to win me over, you scumbag.
I will say though that Kensho Ono's performance in the original felt like it had a more subtle shift between Yuri's two sides. It's similar to Lloyd, I think there's a difference of speed and directness that the adaptive writing does lean into, while still playing into the overall purpose of the characters in this wacky narrative. But overall, I'm looking forward to hearing much more of Yuri in both language tracks, as long as things don't go in a certain direction with him and his sister.
I love my family.
One thing I was more curious about after reading the original manga was how the show could sound in English given its setting. We might get more clarification on this down the line, but this setting seems to be based off of East Germany during the Cold War without actually being real-world Europe. So hypothetically, what accents should or even could these characters have in English? It's not as if the show doesn't work without them, it's just that given how anime dubs often stick to that general American sound, sometimes we want to look for opportunities where something else is warranted, even though that's clearly not present in the Japanese audio. But even then, it really depends on the production. When an English language production is set in a certain country, some argue adding accents would help with the immersion. But on the other hand, you could argue that if characters are speaking their own language in their own country, then the English version of the dialogue shouldn't be accented. That's the approach we take with dubbing anime set in Japan, after all. And you could also see that in things like Chernobyl, where most actors use their natural accents. Maybe remote recording could have been used to reach actors with authentic accents more easily, but, you know. We already have another video on that topic, as well as simuldubs and the current affairs of Crunchyroll's dubbing, so we'll just leave it at that.
It's exhausting, putting on an act every waking moment.
Spy Family is a show that wears its heart on its sleeve. Sometimes it's genuinely tender, other times it's allowed to be a wacky, zany, over-the-top cartoon. But every now and then, it slips out a dark and foreboding undertone that catches you off guard, or might even scare you a bit if you think about it. Hey, that also rhymed. A show like this needs a dub that's finely attuned to all of these shifts, but I think that for a show about lies, deceit, and double lives, the dub for Spy Family also does a solid job covering a wide variety of ranges.
A perfect 100 points!
Not quite there just yet, but we are definitely on the right track. Those shifts in personas might not always be as subtle as you'll find in the original, and some word choices might sound a bit awkward at first. But for now, the staff know the characters we're working with while also getting caught up in the fun of it all. And I also definitely enjoyed discussing one of the most fun shows of the season today. Mostly because Kongming hasn't been dubbed yet.
I really like this show.
But overall, what do you guys think of the Spy Family dub? Which are your favorite Japanese and English performances? Have you consumed your daily dose of fan art today? What other anime dubs are you watching right now? The pegging show? The child abuse show? A couple of cucks? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, subscribe for more content like this, and follow us on social media for updates. As usual, you could also find updates and corrections to this video specifically in the pinned comment down below. If you'd like to show your support, consider becoming a patron like the many other amazing people who helped make all of this possible, including Reagan Senpai, Andrew Wade Pittman, Ahoba, Jose Argumedo, JR Pictures, Ryan Rodriguez, Queen Era 2, Tristan Gallant, and Unknown Secret 1000. So, quick side tangent, things have been rough for a multitude of reasons, both within our community and just life in general. We hope this largely lighthearted video was able to give you a quick break from it all. But if you want to show support to people that have been affected in the past couple of days alone, we'll put some relevant links in the description down below. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, you peanuts.
Having a good time?